Welcome to the Stiles Council, a podcast about the England national football team. I'm Chris Neat, and I'm joined by David Hartrick to talk about an England win that doesn't necessarily feel like an England win, Dave.
No, it was an England performance that we haven't seen for a while, wasn't it? It was that first half was extreme for somebody who's been watching England since the sort of mid-80s. That first half performance was extremely reminiscent of so many other England first half performances, and we'll get into it. But I mean, as you know from WhatsApp, I was pretty annoyed.
Yeah, we're talking about England's 1-0 win at Leicester City against Switzerland in a friendly on Tuesday night. And Dave, I want to begin with a bit of a curveball question to you. Something that's been sitting on my mind today. Do you think there was a genuine, noticeable improvement in the second half? That's the story.
Well,
I didn't really see it that way.
No, I think all that happened was England slightly upped their tempo.
Yeah.
Brought some of their regular players into that 11 because there was a real distinct lack of relationships from position to position on the pitch. And to be honest with you, I thought Switzerland actually took a massive nosedive after a really impressive first half performance. I thought it was them that came out after half time and did an England. Yeah,
they did. They made 2 substitutions at half time. So we both made a lot of substitutions, but they went early. And I think that had an effect. Probably in particular, Rodriguez going off at half time had an effect because he's such a dynamic presence on that left-hand side for all his teams.
Yeah, I also think though Akanji at the back. I mean, I don't know if you know anything about Akanji, but he's obviously Dortmund's quite big money signing in January, I think it was. And he's a really impressive young defender. And I would go so far as to say that I'm not so sure we would have scored that goal with him on the pitch.
It was a defensive lapse in part, certainly.
It was. Well, before we start getting into the finer detail, I guess we should probably start at the start, shouldn't we?
Let's start at the start. So the England team was much changed. Was it 9 changes, Dave? I think from Saturday.
Yeah.
We had Jack Butland in goal, Kyle Walker, James Tarkowski, and Harry Maguire. Eric Dyer started, and then wing backs we had Alexander Arnold and Danny Rose, who got a start. We had Loftus-Cheek, Delph, Rashford, Welbeck. It's not a scratch team, Dave, that.
No.
There are some players in there who have a very good case to be cast iron starting 11 players, some that would be close to it and some that are going to be a lot closer given some recent retirements. It looked like a scratch team when it actually took to the field, though.
Yeah, I think that's in part. What a successful World Cup, the nature of the way we did it. What that means is I think we have such a solid and settled starting 9, possibly 10, that it's actually quite difficult when you start changing from that, when you start deviating from that to this degree, because it was really obvious from the start that back 3 and Butland just had no communication together at all. And I'm not just talking about the Jack Butland's 2 major incidents. You could just see there was an awful lot of, are you coming? Am I getting it? You know, there was a lot of indecision. There was a lot of wobbling. And while it's not a scratch team, it's a team that, to sort of touch on something I said earlier, you could just see that there's very little relationship from player to player in there. And that was just so evident at times. And to be frank, Chris, it's slightly worrying because football's a squad game, and it's all right when we are on this high and we are pleased with where England are going, and we're both very much cheerleaders for the England national team at the moment, Chris. but it does worry you when you sort of see them make changes and suddenly the house of cards falls down.
Changes within the senior team. And that's why I remain confident that we can do something going forward. Because the answer to Jordan Henderson not playing in a friendly probably shouldn't be Eric Dyer.
Oh.
That's a really bad example, actually, because we'll come on to the fact that we are looking severely understaffed in that department. But I think a lot of these are current backups who are playing these. And I think we have significant talent coming through the ranks that's going to take over from these and provide some decent competition for the first 11. The issue first came up in the first Belgium game in the World Cup, where suddenly we looked quite poor at times. And I think up against what I think is a relatively decent Switzerland side by the standards that they've had over the last 10 years, we looked like the same team. Bunch of different players. A lot of the players who did come into that. But that lack of partnerships was really obvious around the pitch, I thought. And despite that, one of my bigger issues with the first half performance in particular is that individuals weren't pulling their weight. And I was disappointed with some. Ruben Loftus-Cheek briefly, and it was picked up by the Sky commentators, briefly got into this one-on-one battle with Freuler that looked like it was going to be really interesting and really exciting. And then he just disappeared.
Yeah.
I reckon we got maximum 20 minutes out of Loftus-Cheek on Tuesday. Yeah,
and I'm a big fan of RLC, but there's already been a little bit of blowback against him. What does he do, etc., etc. He is an excellent player, but I honestly think that playing in that midfield was a nightmare with Dyer because, as you know, I was furious with him first half. There were times in that first half where Eric Dyer was strolling round as if it was a post-season club friendly. There was no tempo to his game. He was walking or mildly jogging in certain situations. He wasn't really covering his back three. He wasn't supporting his front two. He just wasn't offering anything. And Dan Story has written the piece today saying he's not entirely sure what Eric Dyer does. And I think Eric Dyer is a very, very... He's a very, very important part of this England squad because he allows you to take effectively one less central defender because he can cover there as well. But he was absolutely woeful at times in that first half to a real point of distraction for me. Now the problem is with Dyer, if he's sitting at the back in front of your back three, he should be the one who's trying to set some tempo. He should be the one who is pushing those ahead of him. He should be releasing the ball quickly to others and pushing it wide. And he just wasn't doing anything. And I think it's very easy to say, Delph and Loftus-Cheek really didn't do anything. And they didn't. They both had absolute Reggie blinkers themselves. But I do think that that deeper line midfielder is such an important part to the process that you can't ignore the fact that Eric Dyer, I don't know what was going through his mind. He just stopped running. And I don't think he's injured. I don't think he's carrying any sort of injury or anything like that. But he just didn't offer anything, Chris.
I've long thought there was an issue with his mobility. I don't think that was the problem in his game.
No.
I think there was something in his mentality that wasn't quite completely focused on the game. I don't not suggesting something else is going on or he's distracted or whatever, but he was not 100% in that game mentally for me. Delph, I thought, shaded it out of the three midfielders that played in the first half.
Yeah.
You kind of get performances like that from him where he has flashes where he looks like he might be able to inject a bit of energy, but what he isn't is a player who can get into a 3-man midfield with Eric Dyer not pulling his weight and Loftus-Cheek struggling to cover for that and impact the game on his own. So he does get sucked into that, and I think probably to a certain extent Loftus-Cheek can use that reasoning as well. Not completely, but I don't want to put all the blame on one man. What I will say is that when you have 1, 2 or 3 parts of that 3-man midfield not connecting properly, all of them are going to struggle. Unless you've got an absolute belter of a player in there, and that absolute belter of a player is something we don't have. I want to get your comparison on this, Dave. Eric Dyer was poor against Switzerland. Jordan Henderson, I thought, was poor against Spain. And yet, for me, Henderson has pushed himself even further ahead of Dyer over these 2 matches. He still keeps himself involved, doesn't he? Like, there were issues of keeping possession. He was giving the ball away. He was getting caught on the ball against a very good side, but there was a difference.
Yeah,
he was better against Spain, I think, than Dyer would have been against Spain.
Yeah, it's not to go over old ground, but Henderson gives you a sort of metronomic presence in that he will do the same things regardless of what opposition he's playing, whereas Dyer, he had moments in the World Cup where he looked like he could cost us at any moment, and I was speaking to a Tottenham fan about it today because I felt slightly like I was piling on a bit, and I asked him what his form's been like for Tottenham, and Tottenham fans are exactly the same. Really, they've seen a drop off from him. He's not quite where he was sort of 18 months ago when he first made that step up into midfield and was really dominant and was winning the ball and was recycling it really quickly. Last night he was terrible at times. I mean, he improved second half. He is one player who did improve quite a bit second half.
That's fair.
I would suggest that was because he couldn't have done much worse than that first 45 minutes where, as you know, I was tearing my hair out. And that's that's what's slightly frustrating, I think, for me about that England performance last night. I've not felt like this for quite a long time, and I've forgotten that I don't like feeling like this. I quite like jumping around the pub singing Three Lions instead. And, this was... I think we're both making caveats left, right and centre and talking about the squad and relationships, but it's just a hugely bad night at the office where 80% of the players that played just weren't up to the job on the night for whatever reason.
And I thought it was a bad 90 minutes rather than a poor first half, to be honest. I've got a couple of weird follow-up questions on Dyer for you, bearing in mind something you just said. Firstly, one-word answer from you, Dave. Is he a centre-back?
Undecided.
Second question. You've just said a very similar thing about Eric Dyer through the eyes of a Tottenham supporter, as you said about Dele Alli in the last show. Harry Kane, while I wouldn't put him quite in the same bracket at the moment, is he going in the same direction? Have we got a Spurs issue somewhere here? This is weird, isn't it? They've provided so many players for England lately, and we're now talking about 2, possibly 3, slightly taking a backward step.
They're all in the red zone, Chris, I think. That's my honest take on it, and I know it's saying nothing that even your most tabloid of tabloidy journalists are saying, but how you can look at Kane and not think he needs a rest is beyond me at the moment. I don't think Ali needs a physical rest. I think mentally he needs a break. You can see his mindset is just not quite what it was. He's lacking a little bit of hunger. Dyer isn't where he was. And again, I wonder if it's the Kane thing. I wonder if he's just physically a bit tired. And maybe it is a Spurs problem, but Pochettino likes a small squad. We know that. They didn't improve over the summer, and I think I would argue, Chris, there's some actually quite noble reasons for that, really. You know, from two people who often despair of the way modern football clubs run. There's something quite admirable in sort of sticking with what you've got because you don't want to go so balls out the bath when you've got a new stadium coming. But yeah, you could well be right, to be perfectly honest with you. But that's my honest take on it. I just think they've got so many players who just look like they're playing at 80% permanently. And you can get away with that in some league games in the Premier League. Because the Premier League, 2/3 of the Premier League, to be frank, just aren't very good. But when you make the step up to international football, for instance, and a lot of people will be screaming it was only Switzerland. The thing about this Swiss team is like how they got to the World Cup and what their ethos is to make themselves incredibly difficult to beat and break down. That's what they do. So when you're coming into a game either mentally or physically a bit tired, that is the last type of team you want to be playing, who are going to try and strangle the space out of the game and try and hit you on the break. So yeah, no, I think you could well be right. What's your read on it?
Well, I think it's an interesting point, and I just think it's funny that those three players seem to. I'm going to slightly exempt Harry Kane from that. I think that's too harsh. Got a couple of players who we're kind of picking up the same vibes from the same club, who we know are very good footballers. On the other side of that, there's Kieran Trippier, who's been fabulous for England for months now.
Yeah,
and Danny Rose, who I want to come on to next, who had his best game in an England shirt for ages in the Switzerland game. So while it might be a Spurs connection, I don't think it's necessarily a Spurs fault. I'm certainly not blaming Spurs for anything that's happening to England players.
Yeah.
But yeah, Danny Rose came in, started in place of Luke Shaw, who sounds like he's mostly fine, which is fantastic news after Saturday's injury.
Yeah.
He might not walk back into the England team on this evidence, though, because Danny Rose looked like the Danny Rose that we all used to rave about, didn't he, Dave? He was by far our most creative, productive player. Yeah, he was. He looked. You could tell he was enjoying his football again, couldn't you? That was the thing. He was the one player on the pitch last night who you felt was just happy to have boots on his feet and to be running around on a football pitch, and that showed. And he was, he was a really good. He was one of our better players in attack. I thought he was excellent on the cover, and he needed to be at times as well, because there was nobody else getting any support, and it was Delph playing ahead of him, wasn't it, on the left side, and Delph's sort of not the most mobile, sort of agile player, and Rose was sort of almost at times doing the job of 1.5 men. But the thing is about modern wing-backs, when you play a 3, that's what you have to do, isn't it? You essentially have to be 1.5 men for 90 minutes. And I think for England, it's one area where we're sort of embarrassed with the options we've got, and that is good, because going forward, we both know that's perhaps the key area on the football pitch now. Yeah, certainly is for England, particularly because that's where our creativity has to come from. We have at our disposal, just from players who made it onto the pitch last night, Carl Walker, who played in his centre-back position. He's a right wing-back if you want him to be. Yep. Trent Alexander-Arnold, who I thought was okay again. I don't think he's had an absolute stormer for England yet, but I think he's not had a stinker either. We've got Rose. We've got Shaw from last week. And they're just flying through the ranks, these players. Because it's a very modern position, what we have is a young crop of players who've grown up, not thinking that playing fullback is the last pick on the team. Yeah, well, it used to be where you stuck the least talented member of your squad, wasn't it, at fullback? And now it's quite the opposite. But I think as good as Rose was, I
I don't think we should forget about Luke Shaw, because a couple of years ago, before he broke his leg, was it at PSV, possibly?
Yes,
I
it
don't
was.
know.
Yeah, it was.
Right.
Yeah.
He was by far the best left back in the country, and it wasn't even close. He was absolutely sensational. He has started the season absolutely wonderfully well, and if he can kick on now in a United shirt, playing Champions League football, etc., I think he is the future going forward. But to have two excellent players battling for the same spot is a perfectly healthy position to be, as Ashley Cole and Wayne Bridge will tell you.
Yeah. So I've left that other player out so we can talk about him as a substitute. So we'll come on to the subs when we get to a bit of a quick chat about the second half.
Yeah.
Going forward, I think we saw the real Danny Welbeck.
Yeah.
Loads of effort. The wrong side of a couple of referee decisions that could have gone the other way. You know, a little pull here and a little push there. And he's got us through. But he gets pulled back for them. And that's his big contribution.
Yeah. To win free kicks and run around a lot. I'm not nowhere near as down on Welbeck as many are. I think he's got a worth and a value to this squad, but the problem with Welbeck is the way Arsenal are already looking like they're playing.
Yeah.
There is just no natural place for him in that first 11 besides the League Cup. And the more and more I look at it, and I was watching it last night, if he's still at Arsenal this time next season, he won't be in the England squad. And I'll go further and say he'll be quite away. There will be worse players ahead of him because, you know, his career will have tumbled off the cliff, to be honest with you.
Yeah. What I mean by the real Danny Welbeck is permanent ring rust.
Mm.
It's not that I've never rated him, because I do very highly. But he just never, for various reasons, seems to manage to get himself regular football.
No.
And you're absolutely right. If he doesn't do something to get himself regular football, and, you know, touch wood, that involves staying fit as well. If he's still at Arsenal this time next year, I don't think he ever plays for England again.
No. I don't think he's a bad footballer, but it's almost impossible. The problem you have with Welbeck is it's almost impossible to talk about him currently without discussing his faults. That's the big issue. You can't sit here and be overwhelmingly positive about Danny Welbeck. And that in part is not his fault, but there is also a situation he needs to sort of alleviate himself from. But let's talk Rashford.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your read on Rashford's 2 games, really, not just last night.
I've seen him mentioned in the same breath as Rose after the Switzerland game, and I'm not on board with that at all. I am delighted that he's managed to pick up a couple of goals, and I thought he took them both very well. The fact that he put those away, for me, is the only thing that he did better across these 2 games than Raheem Sterling. So, I think he was good in both. But I also think that he was leading an England side that was short of its best player in that position in both games.
Yeah.
Because he looked more lively against Switzerland. There was a professionalism to his performance against Spain. He looked young and excitable against Switzerland, which is really endearing, and it looked likely to cause a few problems in the few little flashes that we saw. But you get the flip side with him, and it was in evidence on Tuesday night of he can be a little bit of a head down player in that situation. I don't particularly have an issue with that, but maybe particularly in international football or just in top class football generally, you've got to match that with productivity.
Yeah, I am.
He got me off my seat. He's the only player who did.
I am unreservedly, and it's well known at this point, I am a massive fan of Marcus Rashford. I think he is, for me, he is our exciting striker going forward. The problem is when you look at him over the last 2 games where he has played more centrally than he is asked to do in his club side, I really think at the moment he is stuck between being 50% of one and 50% of the other. And I am seriously worried that we've got another Theo Walcott on our hands here, where we're going to end up with this supremely talented footballer who is played wide because of his natural strengths, who wants to play through the middle because of where they see themselves heading, but is sort of permanently stifled at club and international level by better players being in front of them. And I think it would be an absolute crying shame if that happens to Marcus Rashford. But you're quite right. He's had a very mixed couple of games because he scored. I think that's the best goal I've seen England score against Spain since probably, do you remember the goal against Scotland a few years ago where we just worked it? Rooney scored, tapping at the end, where we just cut them apart. But he also frustrated me in that Spain game because he kept running down, typical sort of blind alleys. Then last night, he had more space to go into. He had more time on the ball. And I don't think he used it any better than he used it on Saturday. And his goal, I thought, was a pretty smart finish. And he did pretty well to spot where the space was and just hang on to that back post. Wonderful ball in from Walker. And I think it was Gary Neville that said it on commentary. It's just all about concentration. Concentrate,
totally.
Keep the ball down, get your foot through it, put it past the keeper. But I just feel like there is so much more in Marcus Rashford, and it's so frustrating when you see the moments both at club and international level that do get you off your seat and you think more. Just want more. Now, it's another classic one, Chris. I don't think his club situation is helping him at all. I don't think his club manager is helping him at all. But it's a weird one with Rashford because I'm also not sure he should be moving anywhere either. But I just hope we're not going to get a player who is never going to play in the role they want to and always be playing in a role that their heart's not in. It's I don't know. The jury's slightly out on me for Rashford, but I remain a massive fan. I think he has got so much ability, it's untrue. But we'll see if it's ever, if he ever reaches his peak.
Let's move on to substitutions then. Second half subs all over the place, of course. John Stones came on the hour along with Harry Kane and Jesse Lingard. Classic Stones performance. He improved the defence and he almost cost the defence big time. He's got those in it. It's every game, Dave, isn't it? One of those.
It's worth saying that triple substitution came on. And I don't know what happened, but I completely missed the fact that Stones had come on. And
okay.
It was only pretty much at the point of an error that I went, oh, John Stones has come on. So I guess that's a slight reflection on that second half performance and a slight reflection on Tarkowski as well, who I don't think he was the worst of the three last night by any stretch. I thought he did okay. But he's just a competent backup, isn't it? Stones came in, and you say he improved the defence, etc. I'm going to take your word on it because it completely passed me by.
Yeah, he may not have done it himself. What he did do, I think, is to glue it all together a little bit better.
Yeah,
because that's the back three that you've got that's much more familiar.
Yeah, Stones, Maguire, Walker, fine.
Yeah, and he also made some classic Stones blocks.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens. I actually, to be honest, out of the four of them, I thought Slabhead was the worst.
Agreed.
Yeah. Lingard was a lot better than Loftus-Cheek, who he replaced. Simple, straight swap in there, and he, right now, is the superior of those two players, and looked it.
And I think that, to be perfectly honest with you, I think that's just about all you can say about that.
Pretty much. Yeah, I was really disappointed with Loftus-Cheek. I have very high expectations of him because I think he brings something very valuable and very different to an England squad, and we saw not a bit of it in this game. Kane for Welbeck. I was a little surprised to see Kane get a go.
Yeah.
Southgate was taking the result seriously, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think he was taking it seriously, but I think there was a real opportunity missed there not to give Damari Gray a run. Is my honest take on that.
Yeah, I just outside of strict football reasons, I was a bit disappointed that he didn't get on.
Yeah.
The England marketing machine has lent heavily on Chilwell and Gray this week. And had it been a qualifier, I wouldn't have given a toss whether they got on or not. With it being a friendly, and with them being the two that had been pulled up to join Slabhead in the squad at Leicester, and then to bring one of them on and not the other, it felt a little rum to me.
Yeah.
Or maybe being overly sentimental.
And we all know Harry Kane, for one reason or the other, is chuffing out his bum at the moment. So there was a real opportunity there to you wouldn't have to make major adjustments shape-wise to get a young player on who is really exciting, really, really quick, and I'm sure could dovetail with Rashford quite happily. So,
and in form.
Yeah,
he's doing it with Maddison brilliantly at the moment.
Yeah, that felt slightly to me a bit Southgatey. And what I mean by that, I mean we are by no stretch are we sort of, anti Gareth Southgate or anything like that. But what I mean by that is it was just that element of safety that we associate with Gareth Southgate. It was that no, we need a presence. We need to bring Harry on at this point. And Kane did what he's done for me since about the 70th minute of the Colombia game at the World Cup, which is looked a yard off the pace, but still get himself in intelligent positions and still try and win the ball and recycle it quickly.
The commentary team was talking about Harry Kane's number of games since 2015 during this match. I know he's played a lot of football, but when it's put in those terms, it's extraordinary and it's quite frightening. When you think about different player, different character, but the career that Wayne Rooney went on to have post 28 years old, you have to be concerned about players who hit young and play that amount of football. I'm worried about Harry Kane's future.
Yeah, in his defence slightly, though, I would say Tottenham and England aren't playing at the moment how Harry Kane likes to play. Kane, for me, he wants to play through the middle on his own. He doesn't want people just behind him wanting layoffs. He doesn't want people getting into his space ahead. He wants to plough a furrow through the middle with a player either side of him.
Yep.
He wants to be the middle of the three. So when he comes on and he's playing with Rashford, he's almost trying to looking for his partner when he doesn't need to, and he's having to be careful of the space he makes, the runs he makes. He's very much a player who wants to play on his instinct, so that if he gets it wrong, he can correct it quickly without having to worry about where another body is. And Tottenham have put Moura much closer to him this season, and I think he's struggled a little bit, and I don't think he works as a two for England. But I don't think we're going to play with a two going forward. I think we will play with a three, so we will play to his strengths. But it was just a bit of a nothing half an hour from him, but that's where he is at the moment. I am sure that the best thing he could do, Chris, for my money anyway, is to break a toe. If he could drop a hammer on his foot tomorrow and break a toe and have 3 months off, I think he'd be absolutely fine. I genuinely do.
Yeah, it feels like he needs it. Right, we'll go very quickly through the last ones because there's a big topic that we haven't touched on that we're not going to have enough time for. Speaking of substitutions, what I didn't notice, Henderson for Delph. Took me a good 10 minutes to notice that. He was fine, probably on Delph's level, slightly better, but whatever. Then we had Trippier come on and be Trippier, and we had Ben Chilwell get his chance. And I thought he did rather well, to be honest, for his 11 plus minutes.
Yeah, you can see why Liverpool scouted him 2 years ago.
Yeah, and he started the season on fire as well. He's been brilliant. I've seen more of Leicester than anyone else for whatever reason, and he's been fantastic.
Yeah, that Liverpool comment was a little reference for those of you who read Football 365's media watch regularly. But no, I thought he was very, very good, and I've always liked Chilwell. You look at him and you look, well, there's a player who's going to be at a top 6 club, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. The big topic of the week that we have to address before we finish, Dave, because it was something that opened up like a gaping wound on Saturday and was just completely obvious again on Tuesday night against Switzerland. England's midfield is crap.
Yeah. There's no disguising it. There's no getting round it. We have a huge black hole at the heart of that team. Now we can play round it and play through it against certain teams, but there is no denying over the next 2 to 4 years we are going to have to fast track some of the kids who are doing really, really well in the under 21s, the under 20s and the under 19s. And even if they're not getting regular football, they are going to have to be drafted into this squad very, very quickly. You've already mentioned Maddison. Yeah. Will Hughes is another one who I think has to come in and we have to have a look. I am not a John Joe Shelvey fan, but I think it's getting to the point where needs must. We are really, really struggling. I mean, if there's some weirdo out there who wants to make a case we're actually all right, go and just have a look at the squad we picked for these 2 games. There's more than one round peg in a square hole on top of the sort of general lack of quality anyway.
I think the issue with the midfield, or the outcome of the issue with the midfield, is we can patch it up to be good enough to beat teams we should be beating. But to me, it's the absolute tip-top number one reason why we're not able to beat teams that are supposedly better than us.
Yeah. Well, we can put out an excellent front 3 supplemented by 2 really, really good wing-backs and a very, very solid back 3 and keeper. Now, if you do that, you're going to beat 80 to 85% of the teams you face, Chris. The problem is, it's the 15% that you are just going to take the ball off you. And the problem with sort of playing this system and relying on speed and pace and a bit of width, you've got to have the ball. You've got to have the ball. And, Dyer was a great big vacuum on that pitch last night. He wasn't keeping hold of it. He wasn't asking for it. He wasn't chasing it. And that's like any other side in world football will be looking at that and thinking, right, well, there's where you target. That's the man. If we're going to let a man have the ball, get him on the ball because he can't do anything with it. But these aren't new problems, are they, Chris?
No, that was a World Cup problem.
Yeah,
we've got a problem with protecting the defence, and we've got a problem with unlocking theirs. And that's 2 midfielders.
Yeah. But the thing is, I think there are options we can look at, Chris. There are options. I've seen Will Hughes live 3 times this season. Now he has a very nasty streak in him. He was very, very lucky to stay on against Burnley in the first half after a pretty dreadful tackle. But he was also one of Burnley's 3 best players first half, and then he was Burnley's best player in the second half, and capped it with Watford's best player, I should say, and then capped it with an absolutely wonderful goal. He is worth a look. James Maddison, I am a massive fan of, and I loved him last year at Norwich. He's come on and he's taken to the Premier League like a duck to water so far. There will come a point where he plateaus, we know this, but get him into the squad, because there's absolutely no reason not to. And there are other players, but we're going to have a look at a lot of players in that position, Chris. And what we've got to hope is we find a player who adheres to the Podolski rule, that, raises it for England. And yeah, it's not a new problem, and there is a conveyor belt coming of players we can try. But Southgate's got to be brave as well, hasn't he, Chris? That's the other side of it. He has to be brave and go, do you know what? It doesn't matter that this is a qualifier or this is a game that matters. We have to have a look at these players. We can't keep chucking them into games like, we can't keep putting them into a game like last night where some of the more established players clearly didn't lift a leg, because that just doesn't help them in the slightest. So, yeah, it is the England problem now, isn't it?
It is. What concerns me is that we are predictable in that if we go into Euro 2020, and we'll do well not to qualify for it, with a team shaped like this, we will probably do okay until we come up against a team that's better.
Yeah.
Will come earlier than the semi-final this time.
The one thing you can't do, and in international football, you can go through the last World Cup, the last European Championships, you can look at a team like Iceland and the success they've had. What you have to have is a midfield that works as a unit, and that offers that protection for the back 4 or 5, so they're not just getting constantly peppered, but that also feeds the players going forward. And at the moment, it's not... I keep saying it, and I do get a bit of grief over it. Henderson is not a bad player. He's just not a good player. He's just a player. He is just a central midfielder. And it would only take somebody who was just a tiny bit braver would look a hell of a lot better in there. Dyer had a shocker last night. I do think he's got a place going forward because he's a very useful member of the squad, but he's got to get back to the levels of sort of 18 months ago. Loftus-Cheek is a great hope going forward. Delph, Chris, for me, if we're still picking Delph in sort of, even in 6 months' time, Chris, then that's a worry for me, because that's the position where you need to be bringing into that squad a Maddison, a Hughes, etc., etc. So we'll see, but Southgate has just got to be a little bit braver. He's got to be a little bit braver, because you can't keep... It's that old horrible sales expression, Chris, but it's right in this case. If we always do what we've always done, we are always going to get what we've always got. So we'll see.
Yeah, perfect place to leave it. You can follow us on Twitter at England Podcast, and all of the other stuff will just fall out of that if you're that way inclined. We will be back probably in a couple of weeks to talk general England stuff. Hooray, back to normal.
Yes.
See you later.
See you later.